Greetings, parish orphans and retrogrades. Happy feast day of Thomas Aquinas, the Angelic Doctor, also known as the Common Doctor, also known as the Universal Doctor. I want to talk some about what his three titles actually mean and what the import is for Catholics today. People are trying to supplant Thomas Aquinas in some in some corners of the Catholic landscape as the GOAT. And he is the head and shoulders greatest of all time. Here with me today to talk about it is my friend, AJ Barker, who's recently written a treatment of Aquinas, which is very, very helpful. AJ, how the heck are you, buddy?
I'm doing well, Tim. Great to see you today. Great to be on.
It's funny because when you have a friend on the show, as opposed to, just a random guest, it's easy to slip into saying, how are you, slugger? How are you, buddy? It sounds funny, but of course we're very fond of you here at Rules for Retrogrades. And I figured that being March 7th, this is a pre-recorded show, but being at March 7th, this is the real feast day of Thomas Aquinas, the day on which he died. And I've been irked over the last 6 months on Catholic social media, lots of stuff to be irked about there, but particularly about the misapprehension of our common Doctor Aquinas. Folks seem to want to knock him off the pedestal, don't they? You have kind of two poles of this, where you get normie Catholics that have received the memo, Thomas is the GOAT, but they don't really know how to import him. So they'll try to do a show on Aquinas. And it's like, I think you guys disagree with Aquinas on a lot of his thornier points, that the true Thomists out there, we accept all of it. And then that tends to cultivate the other pole, which is an overcompensating reaction, which is like, oh, you know who else is based? Scotus, Bonaventure, Suarez. It's like, well, of course they're based. They're Catholic saints and doctors, but they're not Thomas. You know what I mean? Did you see any of this, AJ?
Yeah, actually, a thought just came to my mind that I think part of the genesis of this has to stem from the dispute over the letters of St. Paul, over what's genuine authorship, what's not. Throughout the history of the church, there were the 14 letters of St. Paul. We can list them off: Romans, 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, right? 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, and Hebrews, right? And Hebrews was considered a Pauline letter, and I hold it to be as well. And now in the historical critical method of the last 150 years, not only did they kind of throw out Hebrews, which is a scandal itself, they started to question all the other letters. So you have these, these are authentic Pauline letters, and the other ones. And the reason I bring this up is because there's an interesting point that people seem to be making when they're at the ground floor, when they're trying to dispute the Pauline letters. They're saying, well, I don't know that it was one person that did it all. I think it's more likely that it was a team of people, that it was multiple people. And the way genius works is that the more concentrated the genius is in the individual, the more it actually spans to multiple areas, the more profound it is across things. And so, for Thomas, it's like, I to now tie that back, right? We look at Thomas and we go, yeah, that's really good, but let's also sprinkle in other things. And it's like,
right,
let's not.
Let's not.
Just where the genius is more perfected, there's more fruits in sort of all the areas. So I know that was a little digression there about St. Paul, but it just came to my mind like, oh, well, there's something people do with Holy Scripture on the basis of like, well, I don't think one person would do all of this. And it's like, no, actually, the only way all of this would get touched is if it's one person. If you start to throw in a sort of democracy, a panel of people trying to come up with a genius thing, it's never happened anywhere.
No.
Right.
No.
And so,
there's a kind of tendency in the 21st century toward precisely the bias you're talking about, a committee system, like I miss the 90s in the NFL, where you didn't have committee halfback systems. It might be more efficient because a running back in football is such a workhorse to just get a second half decent halfback and have him carry 40% of the downs. But it's killed the run game in football. It's killed our appreciation for good running backs. And there is that bias. And what it is at the heart of Christianity today, particularly Catholicism, is a Cartesian doubt. Oh, Thomas couldn't be this comprehensive. He wrote so much. It can't all of it be insightful. And the fact of the matter is, I remind you, parish orphans and retrogrades, on his true feast day, March the 7th, the day in which he died, it was just everything he touched is amazing. Theology. I tend to, I'm trained in Thomistic philosophy, particularly his metaphysics, the real gem. So I'm reminded every once in a while, partly when I was reading your book, AJ, that across all the areas Thomas touched, not just, the heavy hitting areas like metaphysics, but even when he writes on theological truths that are well known, he deepens them. That's true genius today. So that's what we're going to be doing today. First, I want to talk in a little more depth about, I want to substantiate, let's say that, why Thomas and Thomas alone would be called common doctor, universal doctor, angelic doctor, and why this should shut down any of the internet debate about ostensible number 2 Cinderella overshadowings. But so first, we're gonna point people's attention. AJ's book will be highlighted in the show notes. We're going to talk about it at the end of this very show. But if you want a great new, very accessible, but still deep commentary on the Summa, I would point people to your book, AJ. Secondly, a lot of folks out there have already forgotten the news cycle moves fast. We got kicked off of Patreon here on Rules for Retrogrades, and we're asking all patrons and all supporters of this show to move your account or your support or begin new support at Locals or Subscribestar. That would be most appreciated, because people always ask me, how can I support the show? Well, aside from like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe and click the notification bell, do that now. Also, make sure you subscribe to us on Rumble, because the Patreon debacle reminded starkly that at any time one can lose one's account. I mean, I've been canceled everywhere, man. I've lost in real life jobs. I've been canceled from Patreon. I've had temporary suspensions to this or that social media, been disinherited. So I am Mr. Cancellation, and I'm preparing at any moment's notice to go over to Rumble. We're already on Rumble, but I know most people watch videos here. So be prepared. Final word, because the cancellation culture is so sweeping, get out of your blue state, get to a red state today. I suggest the blood red swath of states from Texas to Florida. Go to realestateforlife.org to help you do so. Now, Mr. AJ Barker, you've been on the show several times and you're a great friend of the show. GOAT debates are great. Who's the greatest? I don't know. I've never followed baseball. Who's the greatest hitter of all time or something? They're fun when they're close contests, and folks like to cultivate different dimensions of the debate, which are uncultivated as yet. And it's better when it's not a head and shoulders win. But for Catholics, Aquinas is a head and shoulders GOAT, the way MJ is in basketball. There's not much interesting debate. And because reasonable minds really cannot differ about this, it's irritating when I hear, this goes for the MJ debate too, but we were talking about this a little bit before we rolled. It's irritating when folks try to throw a second place in there that's real. And I know I'm harping on this, but I see it all the time on Twitter. Folks are like, "Oh, you're a Thomist? Well, that's cool. I'm a Scotus, or I'm a Suarezian, or I'm a Bonaventurian. Those guys are amazing, but they're not
a Baltazarian.
I'm a Baltazar. Yeah, though I don't have a lot of those that I follow or that follow me. But yes,
Yeah, well, what about what Baltazar said?
Yeah, that maybe
that'll happen at your local Catholic university. Well, let's be reminded what Baltazar said.
and that happens with lots of the major stations. You were throwing at me a term I'd never heard by my favorite novelist of all time. In the Catholic space now, there are a lot of women's prophets. And that doesn't mean women prophets. I'm not talking about the sex of the talking head people like to watch on TV. I'm talking about the marking the particular speaker by their audience. There's a lot of those. And I think the Baltazarians will be popular among the channels constituted by women's prophets. But I mean, what is the bug that causes Catholics today to say, I want to be a Scotus? Is it just contrarianism or Suarezianism or whatever?
I think let's go this way. I think we could both relate to this observation. Seeing people around us who do it. I think there's something that when people feel like they have a panel of people they're referring to, one, they feel like they're a little bit less vulnerable. Because, there's kind of a consensus around it. But two, I would say the deeper motive, and this is pretty deep, but I think the deeper motive is to then be able to assert themselves in relation to the thing. If it's a sort of sea of people, then, you have this sort of Protestantized Catholicism where it's like my opinion kind of, in a sense, gets to reign, right? If we go look at the Catholic landscape and we include, from the Jesuits all the way to the Thomists, we can pretty much cover any opinion we want. And then we can kind of, we all swim in this area, and we feel a little more invulnerable. And frankly, what we decide on it, like the broad strokes barriers are quite broad. If you include the range, the full tent of what's included under Catholicism. And here's the important point. It's not actually because all the doctrinal positions have merit. It's because the Catholic Church is the vehicle of the sacraments, and the sacraments are meant to go out and reach a broad swath of people. But I actually don't think it's the case that the doctrines themselves there's all this territory to work within doctrinally. The road is narrow and the path is hard for those who lead to the kingdom of heaven. And I think that holds doctrinally.
Yeah, I mean, because I keep naming Scotus. Yeah, Scotus is a great thinker, but he's not the common doctor. He's not the universal doctor, and he's certainly not the angelic doctor. I have a little piece I want to read from that unpacks what these three terms mean. But let me justify that right away for those who have heard Duns Scotus might rival Aquinas in his thought. Nay. Metaphysics, which we're not talking theology. Metaphysics is in most ways the opposite of theology, right? Metaphysics is the realm of the 10 categories of being. God does not pertain to the 10 categories of being. The 10 categories of being are the
substance and the 9 accidents.
Well, substance and the 9 accidents, but they are, if you have quiddity, you get placed in this category of being. This is for the creatures, right? God is the one thing for whom his essence is existence itself. Esse and essence are different. And so when you study God, you're studying something outside. You're studying being itself, or to put it a little bit more accessibly, something that's outside our created being. So it's totally different. When you study metaphysics, only at the very last moment before you transfer to a kind of opposite study of theology, you're studying the 10 categories of existence. You're studying things, quiddities, right? The physical things, quiddities in most cases, or in some invisible things, quiddities. But for all of those things, including the angels who don't even have bodies, esse and essence are distinct. That's the main marker of studying metaphysics, is 99.9999% of the things you study until the very end, when you turn to God and it becomes a theological study. You're studying a distinct essay essence thing. And for one thing, Scotus isn't even really sure on that point. He's basically mucks that up. For another thing, he posits a univical predication, which just can never happen. If I want to study the metaphysics of someone, I'm turning to Aquinas, and that's really, 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 really tough stuff. And Scotus offers plenty that's of value besides, but this is just one example. Univical predication, this is an impossibility. If I'm studying metaphysics and there's a thinker that thinks that you can make being a generic term, or the good a generic term. This is my problem with Plato as well. This involves univical predication. We won't talk necessarily about what that is, but I'm just saying there are markers that you get if you know what to look for. So part of the problem, I think, with being the clear goat is you become a household name. And this is kind of what happened to MJ too. You know, you get guys that are, I don't know, 7th, 8th, 9th best of all time being pitched as number one. Well, you got to be number two before you can be number one. And the certain player I have in mind isn't even number two. But part of being a household name is you get a larger swath of folks that are trying to knock you off the pedestal, just because you're pricking the contrarians in a way where they're like, well, an even larger group of hoi polloi are calling this guy the goat. It doesn't necessarily mean he's not. It probably means he is. But I think this is what has happened to Aquinas. And this is why the interaction of the Catholic social media space, this is largely a media space of women's prophets, as you pointed out right before we rolled screen. You get kind of talking heads that will acknowledge, you know, it's his feast day. Thomas Aquinas is the common doctor. But then you get the people that know a bit more than that they just want to drop a name to sound like, oh, you know, I said before we started rolling, well, isn't Jamal Crawford one of the most skilled NBA players of all time? Isn't he really better than Jordan? No. Yeah, it's done. Scotus is cool in lots of other ways, but look at his metaphysics. No, he's no Aquinas.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's
I mean,
comment on that if you want to, but so
I'll throw in this comment for people who are wondering, the women's prophet reference, The Adolescent by Dostoevsky, novel, one of the 5 novels he wrote in his, you know, prime time, from Crime and Punishment up through Brothers K. The character is a 19-year-old boy who new young man, we might say, and he's being humiliated by these insults that are traveling around, that his father, who he was estranged from, who he didn't know, is a woman's prophet, and he's so infuriated by it. And so that's where that term is always funny to me, and that's what we were talking about.
I did a tweet last night. No, I'm delighted by that term, and I've read Dostoevsky's 4 great novels, and you're like, well, have you read the 5th? And I was like, no. I always thought The Adolescent was a long short story from the early Dostoevsky period. I don't know how I missed it. I thought it was like Notes from Underground, which is not. It's a novella, and it's not really the same quality as his later stuff. But I'm gonna have to pick that up. But you said, this term women's prophet. I'd made this tweet last night, or whatever you say for a verb with tweets, and it went like this. It's kind of long, but you can do that on modern Twitter. I said, I've got to say, American Eastern Orthodox bros like Jay Dyer, to name just one, but there are others too, seem to have a lot of salutary masculinity and cheerful spontaneity. Genuine, fun, cool dudes I'd actually like hanging with, who seem like they have nice wives who don't belittle or berate them, which is, I think, a problem in the Catholic space, which has been so badly infiltrated by feminism and women's prophets. And for all the totally rightful complaints among faithful Catholics about Roman Catholic hemorrhaging due to the awfulness of Francis and the Novus Ordo Missae. I'm with these complaints, by the way. But this other issue, the manliness issue, is what most sorely damaging American Roman Catholicism. A paucity of genuine, spontaneous, non-LARPy, unabashed masculinity in our Roman Catholic pop culture, parish schools, chanceries, presbyterate, and episcopate. Dynamic masculine energy that young men emulate and young women want to follow. Where are all the men just being men? Yes, this is all one tweet. You can do it now. Mainly, I'm just sick of my beloved Roman Catholicism being a laughingstock because it's non-endemic, but by now totally thoroughgoing effeminacy. It's low-T grievance mongering, and it's obvious behind-the-scenes henpecking.
Yeah.
You know what that means. P.S. I'm not at all compelled by Eastern Orthodox theology, never will be. I'm not going anywhere, but rather by the authentic, cheerful virility of several of the Eastern Orthodox bros, like Jay Dyer.
Yeah.
He's loud. There are other ones, like the post-conversion Roosh, who are very quiet, but they both have this fun, spontaneous, natural male virility that I don't see in the Catholic space so much. I see a lot of women's prophets. And I think a lot of it has to do with the domestication of Thomism. To be honest, if you have to ask, you'll never know, is how I conclude that. But when you domesticate our greatest thinker, when you say, hey, you know, Thomas is the greatest, and you have folks knowing his name as a household name, then you're inviting the sort of challenge by the gadflies of Athens, who are contrarians. So that's part of it. I'm not saying this is the whole of the making of Catholicism's serious issues with effeminacy in the 20th and 21st century. There's also an infiltration campaign that the Soviets, the Marxists, the Masons ran. But I think it's reflected in what we're talking about with Thomas here today. When you read a page of Aquinas, wow, he is not one of these women's prophets. Few of the medieval Catholics were, neither is Scotus, neither is Suarez. None of them really were. Yeah. But we didn't even have female doctors until after Vatican II. Did you know that? They made all 4 female doctors after Vatican II. But I don't know. I think there's some sort of parody here, or some sort of parody of explanation in the explanatory gap.
Yeah, I think one comment I'd make, because you know, I did a long form interview with Royce about my backstory, and really like how that went. But one of the comments that you'll get back from people, because you kind of get the polar opposites. You get people who really like it, because it's me talking about my human experience of my life through the lens of what I've learned through my conversion and my understandings of the faith, the Thomistic understandings, most of all.
Anytime I talk to you, it's just, oh, well, here's what Thomas says here, and you're pulling out chapter and verse. I mean, half the time we'll be talking basketball. I'll make an analogy like I just did between basketball and Thomas. We'll be like, well, Thomas says this, and this. I'm like, that's really good. That's very manly to be precise in the implementation. But go on. Sorry,
no, and I was going to say, though, a lot of people, they're in one of two camps. Either they've disregarded the religious altogether, which, they've got their own stuff to sort out. They're way outside the pale. But then once you get into this camp, there's the people that go all the way to the other extreme, where it's like, there's basically nothing of human agency or human reality going on in God's creation and God's design. And I think for me, one of the things, you, Tim, yourself as well, and this is a broader, extra Catholic sort of consideration that I'm talking about. It's not just in Catholic circles, but one of the beauties of Catholicism is that it integrates the two. And I think that anyone who has that sort of authenticity of going through their reality, Catholicism becomes the clear yes. But then what you have, once you're then in the Catholic circles, is you see this sphere of people where it's like, they're not even holding on to the gem that most makes Catholicism Catholic. It's the blending of nature and grace. And so I say that because it's like, if a guy follows out natural arguments, it's going to bring out certain things that are the masculine energy that you're talking about. It's just going to follow from it, right?
Yes.
For example, it's natural masculine energy to know that when you're playing sports, you don't want to look soft. You don't want to be perceived as soft. You don't want your opponent to think that you're soft. Okay, so that's sports. Well, it's the same thing in an intellectual space. If you're going to have that masculine energy, you're going to be like, no, I'm going to assert myself. I'm going to try and do it. I'm not going to make, what we call it, sort of pre-assertive qualifications for what I'm saying. Like, I'm going to say what I think. And if it's wrong, it's wrong, right? And you can prove me right. You can beat me, all that, but I'm not going to go, hey, hold on, let me qualify this 10 different ways before I say the thing that I mean to say.
Yes.
That's not courageous. That's not courageous. And so I think when
it's cowardly. It's not just not courageous. It's cowardly.
Yes,
what did you say? Pre-assertive qualifications. That's a great term.
Pre-assertive. I was making that up in my head at the time. A pre-assertive qualification. You're about to assert yourself and you go, well, hold on, let me qualify this, 20 different ways to Sunday. It's like, right. I don't even care at this point. I don't care. Because if you're not just going to come out and say it, if you're not going to come out and say it, I want to be able to disagree with you. As a matter of fact, I kind of delight in that sort of that confrontational competition like aspect of the rational intellects, which don't see things perfectly. Right. I want that. So I want you to say what you think. And by the way, if you're not ready to say that yet, then maybe just wait a little bit. Keep practicing. Stay in the gym. Keep practicing. And then when you're ready to make statements, throw them out there. Let's go. So.
That's exactly right. No, and that is what is so endemic to the Thomist, like being nailed to the cross of your argument. And like, here are 4 objections. Here are 4 replies.
Yes.
Here's the corpus. Here, I am totally committed. I am all in to this argument. And yes, he doesn't look, he looks before he leaps. But what struck me about your absolutely phenomenal observation just now, AJ, that's actually an exciting insight into what's going on in the church and the world today, is that gaslighting has as its essence, as its core, the pre-assertive qualifications that you're talking about. But I'm serious. What folks will do, and they do it in this Catholic space, they do it on Twitter, they do it on a lot of Catholic YouTube shows, is they will literally pre-qualify anything that might be interesting away.
I know.
So that there's nothing interesting in the statement. Or if they do step out onto a ledge occasionally, this happens more on Twitter than anything, step out onto a ledge and try to have a little bit of a hot take, then you're like, oh, but that's a bad take. That's a strong take, which I like, but it's got to be strong and accurate. And here's why it was strong but inaccurate. And then they'll start going back, receding into the space of what they wish they'd done, what they normally do, the pre-assertive qualification, which seems to be how folks live. And part of what I'm saying about certain Calvinist Protestants out there, like Doug Wilson is one, who does not live and die by the pre-assertive qualification. Now, Calvinists have a whack theology, but culturally, they're much more on the nose than the average Catholic when it comes to things like effeminacy or feminism. They're not infiltrated that way. The ortho bros like J. Dyer et al., there's no pre-assertive qualification, right? And these guys, Doug Wilson, J. Dyer, they do the actual. Again, I think they're wrong on certain points. More obviously, the Protestants are more wrong than the Eastern Orthodox by great lengths, but they both are formidable researchers. They're not the reason they can afford, and this is why your sports analogy is so good, AJ, because they can back it up. That doesn't mean they're right about everything. They're right about enough to be very formidable, because here's chapter and verse. And Doug Wilson, there's a Protestant. J. Dyer, there's an EO guy that are. It's manly. It's manly to not assert, pre-qualify away any assertion you'd make. It might rain tomorrow. Then again, it might not. The Catholic who has forgotten his Thomas and how to do Thomas, and it's not that easy. He's the greatest thinker of all time. Is one that will speak like this, like a woman's prophet. It might rain tomorrow. Then again, it might not. Don't tell me, bro. There's nothing interesting about that statement. It might rain tomorrow, but it might not. You didn't need to open your mouth.
This example comes to mind. I know you'll like this. When I'm coaching people in basketball or football, but we're going to hone in on basketball here, and they're younger. First, I have to encourage them to take shots. Like, dude, you just got to try, right? You got to try, and you're going to fail. All right. They're young though. And so they're doing that. Okay. And I'm encouraging them. They shoot a horrible shot. And I go, all right, keep going. Right. Hey, you're not going to hear anything from me. Keep going. Keep going. Okay. Then we get later in the season and then they get okay, well, but that's a terrible shot. Right.
Right.
So this is what you were getting at. It's like, yeah, first you do need to assert yourself. Then you do need the precision. So it would seem to be a contradictory ethic to someone who's thinking simplistically. Well, you just told me you encouraged me to do my thing. And now you're telling me that this is bad. It's like, yeah, because first we have to get you trying to do it. And now we have to get you doing it great. Right. Now we actually have to have you pinpointing the right things. You have to get the right spacing. You have to get to the right advantage. We want to simplify this as much as possible. If you can do in one move what someone else needs 3 moves to do, you're better.
Right.
Right. And so it came to me as like a good example of that. Like, yes, you both have to be courageous and you have to know what you're talking about. You have to blend them, but first start by being courageous. Throw some statements out there. Right. and maybe it's bad, but you just got to ride with it. Like you just got to do it. And if you don't start there, you're not even in the arena. And if you think, well, I'm going to get everything so precise before I even start, like you're playing yourself. You're already a loser.
I have a slightly different spin on this as it relates to folks talking about interpretations of the hardest and the most elegant and the best thinker ever, Thomas Aquinas. As it relates to shoot, right? I wouldn't say ever, because you coach younger kids, right?
Yeah.
See, as an ex-high school coach.
Oh, I coach at high school.
Oh, you coach in high school too?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. I think
I consider those younger kids.
I guess those are younger kids. If you're talking, you're not a college
I'm
coach.
like, they still, in large, right, in Christian, they still need the baby food. And then we got to start moving them on to the mature food. But
I think even at the high school, it depends where you're growing up. You know, I'm from Texas, where high school sports are basketball and football are king. Even at high school level, I don't just want to tell everyone keep getting up shots. Like the best Kobe Mamba wisdom is, hey, if I'm talking to one of my 3 shooters on my team, one of my 3 scorers, I'll say that,
right,
and they're having a bad day, guess what? It happens. So you just say keep hoisting shots. Get good shots, start with higher percentage shots to fix your psychology, see the ball go through the hoop. But keep shooting. We need you shooting. So it's slightly less egalitarian than what you're saying, because maybe you didn't mean it this way, but I don't want everyone shooting. Yeah. In
reality, no, it's not, because again, I come straight down the middle. It's like, if you can't do something, it's nope, you can't. You gotta not do it. Here's a good example I'll give. If you're playing a very formidable opponent, and you're the best player on the team, you need the mindset going into it that I need to take the number of shots it'll take for me to get a 35-point game. A reasonable, and I'm talking a real formidable opponent. You need your best guy to come through with a 30 to 35-point game. Now, here's the key. Even if you don't get to 35, you have to play like that, because we need that courage from you. Because the better an opponent is across the board, the strong person has to carry more of the weight.
Right.
So I think that actually perfectly aligns with what you're saying. No, I won't tell anyone at any point. Now, if they're really young, right, if you get, JV levels, or you get prior to that, then yes, they need the sort of universal encouragement. And then as it goes on, you refine and you say, hey, that's not your game. And now you need to be aware of that. Most people have never even had that first level of encouragement. So they still kind of have to see what they could be. But beyond that, now we're just straight up talking sports. It does translate back to again, everything. Intellectual thinking, taking it, put it this way. If you're a new convert, like, sure, you're going to have to try on for size some things, but like St. Paul says, no new converts, like take your time, right? Now try it, sandbox it, right? And really assert things. Like if you go to write down in your journal, really assert what you think, so that then, a year later you can look back on it and go, oh, I was wrong, or, oh, that was right. If you go, qualify it 20 ways a Sunday, you're never going to know. You're not going to be able to look back on it and have any sort of juxtaposition and growth. There will be none of the actual good sort of Hegelian dialectic of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You won't even get any of it. So
by way of substantiating here on Thomas Aquinas's true feast day, March the 7th, that whether you're deeply in the know or you're a Catholic who's not deeply in the know, it's a few in the many dichotomy. So don't feel bad if you're not deeply in the know. But we do want to substantiate that Thomas is the GOAT, and nothing does it better than his honorary titles. And listen to these. Let's just talk about each of these for half a second. This is from an article on Thomas Aquinas College, one of the few colleges I really urge parents who have a genius level kid to send your kid to college. Otherwise, don't send your kid to college, people. But it's from St. Thomas Day in 2015. The three titles written by Reverend Romanus Cesario, who's a Dominican. The three titles are the Common Doctor, the Angelic Doctor, and he goes Doctor of Humanity, which was a late title that JP2 gave to Aquinas, which is underwhelming. I'm going to supplant this with Universal Doctor. So let's talk about these for a second. Thomas Aquinas lives as the Doctor Common. Communes, right? We have a common doctor, people. I'm quoting a friend of mine in my doctoral program in Aquinas, who's like, he always says this when other folks start mentioning Bonaventure and Scotus and Suarez, the other great thinkers we have in our background. Yeah. Come on, he goes, come on, people. We have a common doctor who is not fully translated into the world's primary language, intellectual, business, common language, English. We at least need that before we start going to our second, third, fourth, fifth guys. And like you say, Augustine's the second. So when you start going tertiary, quaternary, your third, fourth, fifth guys, let's make sure our first and our second are all together translated first. This is what Cesario writes. Since the early 14th century, the popes have recognized that Aquinas' instruction in theology and philosophy displays the capacity to serve the whole church. There's a comprehensivity to Aquinas. The most recent example of this ecclesial confidence in the thought of Aquinas may be found in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, even the 94 version. Before the 20th century, we know that the fathers of both Trent and Vatican I depended heavily on the thought of Aquinas. At Trent, Aquinas was a copy of the Summa was put on the same level on a pedestal, or maybe just below it, as the New Testament. That's not to assert some sort of paganism. It's to assert that Thomas is the greatest commentary we have. Therefore, the title Common Doctor should be interpreted as a sign of the church's appreciation for preserving the unity of truth. Okay, this is what does this mean to you, AJ? He is the common doctor, people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that says it well. I think I'm excited to now move on to Angelic Doctor and Universal Doctor. But yeah, he's the one. I love the reference to the Council of Trent, where it's right there. I'll throw another one your way. If you read Denzinger or you read Ludwig Ott's Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma, it's just Thomas. And then, frankly, wherever it ventures into non-Thomas, it's the shakiest ground that it's standing on. So,
well said. That's
I've
said that before.
Thomas.
Yeah, with Denzinger, I agree. I really agree. I need to read Ott more. So I mean, flipping through the Denzinger, it's like, this is just the Summa, bro. But let's not fault him. Let's not fault this great compiler for that. That's what you do. In this way, I'm quoting again from well-instructed Catholics honor Aquinas and at the same time contribute to building up the church. This way they collaborate with the Good Shepherd. So, okay, yeah, let's what is the meaning, the honorary title Angelic Doctor mean to you, AJ?
Okay, so I've always been interested by this because I think there's probably a formal meaning of it, but it's funny, my instinct always took it this way. So I'm just going to start with this one because I think it's awesome. I always thought he was called the Angelic Doctor because his mind most resembles an angelic intellect. It nearly immediately grasps a concept. I then heard that it was like, oh, it has to do with how he understands or elaborates the angels, which of course the prime place goes to Pseudo Dionysius, right? Who was a disciple of St. Paul. So I never really got that latter part, but to me, I always thought of it that his intellect is the least confounded by other things. And actually, if you're okay with it, I think now would be a good time where I'll insert how I developed a devotion to Thomas. So not just thinking that he's smart, but a devotion to him. Is that okay if I?
Of course.
Okay. So we were talking about, why Thomas, and I think that this serves as a good background for it. So I had always read Thomas, and because it's so nice. It's like an encyclopedia. You go to, whichever question in the Summa, which part where you have a question, you go there and you get to see him and you're like, okay, cool. It wasn't until I started, I finally at a certain point for my book, which I didn't know I'd be writing a book. I just wanted to learn the faith that much deeper. I said, you know what? I just got to start right at the beginning. Question 1, question 2, right? The one God. Then I got to go through the Blessed Trinity, right? I just have to get these fundamentals down in order to I think my faith, I could sense it needed that at this time. There was a lot good there, but wherever I had sort of unclarities, things that were confusing to me, I was like, I think I need to get to the root goods. And it took me a while. I had to reread them a number of times because I'm opening up Aristotle and I'm having to see the references and start to get a more sort of integrated image of these things and then go through. Okay. But as I build through it and I'm starting to now get closer to that thinking with the mind of Thomas, as I'm doing that, as I'm going through the first part and then the second part of the Summa, right? And I'm building this out because largely my previous Thomas had been dealing with the second part of the second part, the virtues, and then the third part, the life of Christ or the supplementum, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So now I'm getting those foundations down, and at the same time, I'm working on my own vices, namely kind of the last of the appetites where it's really standing for me, which is gluttony, and just trying to hone in on it. Not again, because all of them, they need a balance, they need a beauty to them, but in trying to hone in on it, right? It struck me that the hagiography of Thomas Aquinas is so useful here, that Thomas was preserved from two things. He was preserved from pride. He had profound humility, right? He had a great humility. And there's little stories that demonstrate that, right? He's at university and one of his classmates, asks him, hey, do you want my help studying? And he's like, yeah, sure, just to be nice. And he goes there and the student is like, here, I'll teach you this and this and this. And Thomas just, okay, he's just listening. And then he gets to a part that's tricky to him. And after he takes his attempt at it, Thomas just points out how it goes. And it's like, I always think of it like the scales probably fell for that guy right there. Like, wait, whoa. Who is this guy?
I thought I was tutoring him. Yeah.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, and they said it came to more and more came to be at the university where everyone just is like, well, wait, Thomas, better than the instructor, but he's humble. He's not showing them up. And the instructor's like, so there's this humility on one end, and that's the spiritual sort of defilement, which is pride. At the other end, we have the story of lust with the torch and his parents, trying to set him up with a prostitute, and he what you might know the details better, but
yeah, the firebrand,
the firebrand, and what does he does a burner or something, burns himself. Whatever happens, it now sears in him a preservation from lust. And so this is the actual basis where my devotion to Thomas grew, where as I was trying to study these things, as I'm trying to study deeply these Thomistic understandings, this gift that he's given us. And I realize how, the preservation of my own virtues is actually important in how my intellect really thinks. Like where lust and sobriety and moderation in terms of gluttony, like chastity, sobriety, and moderation, like these are really, really important to how my mind operates. And then we go to the other end and, not even close to the humility that he has. And by the way, also, if you look at this rubric, you see why he's actually even in a different class than St. Augustine, who loves St. Augustine, and his conversion and the grace of it is profound, right? But he had to be he had the lust going through his adult life till he was in his early 30s, right? He had the pride alive. Thomas is preserved. These are a divine grace meant for him to service something different, which is that his intellect so readily grasps a concept. For me, I have to beat my head around it. Whatever the thing goes, there might be a nugget that's really strong there that I'm like, yeah, no, I feel this instinct. But then I have to go and like, is it right? Maybe it's slightly off, or maybe it's confounded by something else. And I have to wrestle my way through it for a few, be it a few months, whatever it is, to then finally get to it. I then began to understand, no, for Thomas, the preservation of these two poles, pride and lust, is the basis for his intellect to readily grasp reality.
Yes.
It's still a human intellect. It's still in potential to all things. It doesn't have infused concepts, but it is most alike to an angelic intellect, which, given its infused concepts, it apprehends them in the moment. And so that, again, that's why even when people talk about Aquinas, it's not just that, yes, you can look at the evidence, you can go read what he said, and it's profound, it's beautiful, it's clear. You really have to read multiples so that you see even where he disputes something with one sentence, he's not being too brief on it. If you take the whole symphony that he's playing in the Summa, it is absolutely perfect, and it conduces to one's humility, the sharpening of their intellect, the proportion of things, the beauty of their intellect and their moral attributes and habits. And so again, it became clear to me that this is the real thing that distinguishes Thomas from everyone else. It is that special grace God gave to preserve him on those two ends. All right, pride and lust from the jump, right? From the jump. And here we have it. It's the evidence of why then we get the Summa that we get, with its just astounding profundity. And the more you dive into it, the more profound it is. The more we've talked about Aristotle and Thomas, and it's like when I read the opening of the Nicomachean Ethics, it's like, oh, even Aristotle is miles beneath Thomas, but Thomas rightly tips his cap to him, right? But even that, it's like, even this last end issue, Aristotle kind of has to weave and blend his way through, which actually is very helpful for me to read Aristotle's. But for Thomas, where that last end is God, and then it has that clarity and the foundation, he can just address the things on another level. So,
yeah, the funny thing is, there's more deference in Thomas to Aristotle on ethics than any of the theological thinkers.
Yeah.
He sounds like he's deferring to Augustine, but on the ethics, it's next to 1-to-1, and because he recognizes this is almost the Holy Spirit before Christianity, Aristotle. But I do think, what your explanation was particularly helpful, AJ, because nowadays there's a bias against pyramidal hierarchies and saying, well, Thomas he's our common doctor. We'll talk about this in a second. He's our universal doctor. He's an angelic doctor. And there seems to be a shying away from saying the angels are also called the intellects. They are pure intellect. They're no body. So they're unimpeded. They have vastly greater epistemic powers, psychological powers than human beings do, because we're impeded by sin and we're impeded by our bodies. Matter being the principle of individuation, also the principle of potency, the main principle, the main force of potency in our life, which is non-being. And you've just perfectly pointed out what I've always thought. He's angelic doctor because he's the closest thing to a pure intellect that a human being has ever walked. And it's because he's not impeded by pride and lust. And on the lust story, on the chapel at St. Thomas Aquinas College in Southern California, one of the greatest places one could send one's kid, is a beautiful painting of Thomas with the firebrand chasing the harlot out of his castle quarters. It's just, it also shows, since we've had several mentions of sex relations, that's a big part of rules for retrogrades, Catholic sex relations, and the remasculinization, to the extent we can, of our little Catholic space, particularly on the internet. This is what a lot of the popular secular bros miss more than anything. Well, one, they miss the humility, but number two, if you want to be truly based in the truest sense, it's got to be a chaste based, and Aquinas is the great exemplar. But I love your explanation.
Yeah, I mean, it's just confounding to everything that you do. It's going to inhibit. I mean, like King Solomon, his downfall is his 700 wives and 300 mistresses, right?
Yeah.
His early reign is just pure gold, and his later reign is just he's taken over by lust after lust, because there is an aspect of an inability to sort of this might be a wrong word, but I'm just like, to own yourself, to have a sort of ownership over. Like, if you just give yourself out to anything, you're spoiling yourself, right? If any girl can have you, then you're weak. Or any girl that wants you can have you. You're weak. Like, there is an aspect of like, no, you have to be able to rein this in. If and I feel the same toward gluttony. You know, it's like, if any good food just grips you and you're just off with the winds, like, you're weak. Yeah. And keep working on it. Keep working. I got to work on them myself, right? You know what I mean? So I'm not trying to act as if it's not something that is a process, right? Real strength isn't that you're perfect. Real strength is that you confront your weaknesses and you hang in there on them, and you don't try and make them something that they're not. But honestly, the same thing goes for sobriety. It's like, if you can't even handle sobriety yet, really, you don't even at base reality. And again, for the Catholics who need to hear it, we're not talking the sort of moderate blend of, pleasures which enlivens the life. Great. But again, if you're shooting duds on the question of being hammered drunk, and then if you want to get down to the details of just general sobriety, be in your base state, right? And that goes to, I even take that to caffeine and things like that. Like, it's a different degree to get to the place where you're just sober. So I think these are things where, again, sobriety, chastity, moderation with food, like, these are important ones. Work at them. They're really, it's a good way. They're the beginning stages. They're not even like, they're not the advanced things. It's like, and I think that mindset helps. I think framing them that way helps. If you treat them like these are the hardest things, you've made a mountain out of what's meant to just be the starting point. Get your appetites in order. Don't think of them as these impossible hurdles to eclipse. Work on them. Yeah. Right? Attempt, fail. Bang your head up against one extreme where you go too far in one direction. Fine. Bang your head up against that. You overdid moderation. Fine. Do that so that then you can draw back to a place of balance. But don't be like, well, I'm going to go from indulgent to just like slowly draw it back to moderation, because you're delusional. It doesn't work. But go after them as a starting point. And then that way, then you're moving on to the other things.
Yes, sir.
Which you're called to do.
And you want to extirpate in your life impediments to recto ratio, to right thinking. That's why Aquinas, I believe, is the angelic doctor. You believe it. Other people have, I think, commingled this covering of the explanatory gap with a less flattering view that Thomas just came up with, the great Genesis of the Angels account, which is true. But I prefer the account that we've given. There's also, of course, the third universal doctor, which is largely redundant with common doctor, but I would point
that's
out
what I was thinking.
There's a difference, though. It's okay. Large overlap. Common doctor means you can basically consult Thomas catechetically for like a catechesis, the ST. The universal doctor has a different import. It means that he can go back and forth between explanations which are philosophical and theological. He can give a priori accounts. He does give a posteriori accounts of what I mean. He basically is the go-to for all issues, universal. Go-to for all people, common doctor.
Yep.
That's the way. Yep. But the point is, there is a modern aversion, or there seems to be anyway, to just acknowledging there's an absolute pyramidal hierarchy, hierarchical ordering, ordinally of who our greatest doctors are. So I'm just trying to get this out there. If you love some of the thinkers that we're saying this is no Aquinas, we love them too.
Yeah.
Even the 4 women doctors of the church, which were elevated to doctorhood after Vatican II in the name of egalitarianism, these are great saints. No,
Yeah.
I don't think necessarily great teachers. And the doctor just means teacher in
Right.
a way that is politically astringent, in a way that is politically redacted.
Yeah, I mean,
from
and
its own
let
day,
me add
but they're
this in.
still great saints.
Yeah, let me add this in too. Part of it is that in their great humility as saints, they weren't even trying to be teachers. We have to go to their private writings and their journals to even mine this for their status as doctors, because there was a sort of profound understanding of God in them. Great. But they weren't even attempting to be teachers.
No.
So I think that resolves it. It would be like if someone said, hey, AJ, what you did here, this lays good foundations for art. Like you're an artist. This sketch that we got from you when you were young, like, it was really, really great. Which you won't find from me. But I'm just saying, if they did that, I'd be like, yeah, but I'm not even attempting to be an artist.
Right.
So it's really not appropriate. Thank you, I suppose, but it's not even necessarily appropriate. One has to first assert themselves into the possibility of success or failure for us to crown them with the highest achievement of success. That would seem to be a prerequisite from a human perspective.
I like that a lot. That's a really great. You have to decontextualize the 4 great saints who are females to even make them teachers, because they would never, they follow scripture, right? Women are never going to presume to teach men. That's a de fide teaching of the church, of St. Paul, of inerrant scripture. So they're not going to do that. You could decontextualize them and turn them into, the private letters or private writings as a kind of doctorate, a kind of teaching. But that's not how they understood themselves. So
yeah, I don't know who these people would be, but if in the last 100 years there's a plethora of women attempting to be, teachers, public theologians, which I'm sure they exist, I just don't know who they are. Whoever they are, okay, well, at least we could say, well, their names are thrown in the hat for consideration. But then they also have to hold up to whatever the standard is of greatness. So like I said, I just don't know who those are. Who's the Baltazar of women of the 20th century? I don't know. It probably exists, but
it does. And
it's probably a good comparison. It's probably a good Baltazar might be the Baltazar of women. For all I know, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
no, there are women out there that would gladly sit astride, walk astride that honorific and say that's me. And there would be lots of Catholic men, even in this online space, that would say, yeah, totally. I think even when I tweeted about this, did you know that there were no female doctors in the Roman Catholic Church until after Vatican II, until well after Vatican II? And people can't even handle that. There's so much effeminate energy in the church. There's so little masculine energy in the church, which is of course, marked by patriarchy, clerical patriarchy, household patriarchy, that we've really gotten away from things. And I say this is related to getting away from things in Aquinas. You wrote a book, AJ. I want to close with this. You wrote this book, Advanced Christianity.
Yeah.
Initially, you didn't set out to write it, you say, but you knew what you're doing by the time you got going at a clip. One, why'd you call it Advanced Christianity? And 2, could you share with us a chapter where you demonstrate the method of illuminating Aquinas the best in your estimation? I think I know which chapter it would be.
Yeah. So first off, I didn't have the title when I set out writing it. And so I did set out to write, like I set out to write a sort of presentation of what I felt, what I'd come to understand and these things. And I'm writing it in prose style. And it's funny, if you're going to talk about the one God and his necessary attributes or the Blessed Trinity, prose is not the format for it, because prose, by my reading, is meant to sort of build someone up to the point and then help ease them down the off ramp of that point. There's a sort of elegance and a style to it. And as I'm writing it, it's like, we're going up, down, and hold on. Actually, we have, 8 more hurdles that we got to go up and get over and up and over. And so, what I started doing along the way, I'm going, man, this is just like emotionally, this is overwhelming. And I'm the one writing it. I start writing out just the bullet point notes of it. And I just start systematizing it. Just what's point A, what's point B, what's point C. Okay. So I start doing this as a sort of framework, an outline like anyone would do, but in more sort of rigor and detail with these things. And I get to the point where I'm like, this is the way. Not only is this the right way to try and do this work, it creates the right sort of disposition toward it, a sort of humility that I just have to say what I think. I just have to prove it. Do I know it or not? So every one of my 7 chapters start with what I think is the most basic statement that I can make about that topic. And then from there, we build out and we get going. So it's 1, 1.1, 1.11. But even that, what I slightly did different there is I didn't just make it in ascending order. What I did is I wrote it in a way that I thought, hey, this is going to be a good point for you to know. After hearing that, I think this one's going to be a good point. So it's sort of a prose-like creative license. But what I did is then I numbered it so that if you were wondering, here's how it fits in systematically. So I ended up actually calling it scholastic demonstration, because it all came from my study of the scholastic disputation of Thomas, where when you really get in the habit of reading that, it's really profound what the effect and the help it does to the intellect. But a lot of people who have tried to write Thomistic sort of synthesis, or where they just give the I respond parts, they sort of synthesize that and do that, and in a kind of prose way, or maybe even they kind of number it. Again, there's something that just over time, it doesn't seem to quite satisfy. So that led to the method. And then I would say at the heart of it, underlying this, was this question for me of like, this reoccurring question that I would have is like, the things that are really prominent nowadays, things like universalism. Okay. These questions, these sort of theological questions, like, I'm not finding where Aquinas directly addresses it, takes on the question of universalism. Now we can piece together things, certainly, but it doesn't seem like it's just addressed right there. And so I started to have these questions of like, and I think this is the heart of any real devotion, is it's a praying to that person, help me to understand this. I'm not just trying to learn this for some badge that you can give me that says I'm a Thomistic scholar. I actually want to know reality. I want to come into better contact with reality. Like how would that question be answered? And so that led me to now write this in a way which is saying, here, I'm piecing together a lot of different Aquinas. And but a lot of it is from that work that I've done, me now just firing off, okay, a lot of it is just foundationally from Thomas, but I'm not directly quoting, right? But it's like, here, I'm putting this in there and I'm building out these different areas. And here's my demonstration of where my knowledge has come to that I think is helpful. And so the title comes about that when I do this for the one God in the Blessed Trinity, which we've talked about some on the phone a couple months back. When I do it on the Blessed Trinity and I'm going, this is not an introduction to Christianity. I was thinking an introduction to Christianity. And then I was thinking maybe an introduction to advanced Christianity. It just became clear. I was like, this is advanced Christianity. And it's meant to be an introduction to advanced Christianity. I just thought the title Advanced Christianity was a little bit more compelling. I just thought artistically it was a better title. And so I went with Advanced Christianity. I have 7 topics, and getting to your second question, the main one that I want to talk about today was my experience in coming into contact with the reality of Thomas Aquinas' position on predestination. Because I think there's a funny and relevant backstory to it, a sort of insightful backstory to why that question gained stature in my mind. And it wasn't because I was sitting there wondering how predestination worked or something. I didn't set out to say, I want to write a book on predestination. What actually struck me is I had been reading Aquinas And I read, I think it's around question 23, he touches on, of the first part, he touches on predestination. And I had read it, and I'd read it over a few times because was trying to grasp it, and didn't feel that it totally clicked, but I felt, okay, I'm kind of in good enough territory. I'm moving on to the Blessed Trinity and these things, and I'm moving on to other stuff. And then I'm listening one day to a Dominican on a podcast, one of these, more modern, Catholic podcasts, a Dominican talking about predestination. And he's attempting to do so with what he says is real clarity. And I'm sitting there going, this seems to actually be really wrong. Like, I can point to these things. And so he was touching on the relationship between grace and the free will. And what he was saying, it's not that he was in grave error. It's that, first off, it wasn't very clear. So the interviewer had to keep asking him, oh, so it's like this? Wait, so could you pick that apart? And the guy would say something, and it's like, it was clear. It wasn't any clearer to the interviewer. And they're like, oh, okay. And so I'm going, all right, there's not really clarity on that, where it's this kind of blending of, the Jesuit Molinist position and the Aquinas one, which is, carried on by Suarez or who not. But I'm going, it seems to be trying to blend. It's not clear to me. It's not clear. And I actually don't think Aquinas is like that. So then I go to the Catholic Encyclopedia, and I start reading on predestination, and we get to the bottom of it. And he talks about Aquinas's take, how it's apparently wrong because he missed on the Pauline progression, which is first he foreknew, then he predestined, then he called, then he justified, then he glorified. Right? That's the Pauline progression where you have predestination thrown in there at the second note. He goes, well, Aquinas, along with Calvin and whoever else, they missed on the foreknowledge point. See, God foreknew who would, respond to the graces, and so then he predestined them, which of course is just a neo-Pelagian form of merit. But here was the funniest part. This is why it was so good, is because he goes, well, he missed on the foreknowledge piece. And then you go, no, literally in the question on predestination, and you guys can go find the article. I forget exactly which article. I think maybe 5th or 6th article, and there might, however many, it's toward the end. He literally takes as one of the primary objections the statement from Paul that first he foreknew, then he predestined. And of course, he dismantles it easily. So I'm sitting here, I'm going, okay, the Catholic Encyclopedia is way wrong on this. Of course, eventually I had to go look. Well, it wasn't at that time, but I go, well, this is, when the Catholic Encyclopedia one was dismissing St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas. And I was like, you have to be in shaky territory to just
right.
They're in concert on this thing, and you're dismissing them. I was like, you have to be on shaky territory at that point. Well, then I read another article later on, unrelated, and I'm like, this strikes the same way they wrote about predestination. So I go, who's the author of this article? And so it's this Joseph Poli, and then the other one's Joseph Poli. And I come to find out, it's literally hard to even find out at first, Jesuit, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, I can piece this together. All right. So now I go back to it, and I actually prayed to St. Thomas Aquinas. I prayed to him, and I said, St. Thomas, help me. The same way he would, to the great saints. I remember reading that he would pray to them, to St. Peter. I would hear that in his hagiography. He would pray to them, to St. Paul, clarify this passage for me. So I prayed. I said, St. Thomas, will you help me to clarify this topic of predestination, that I might know more rightly what you see, what you taught, right? And really probably one of the more profound experiences of prayer being answered over the following probably 3 to 4 days. So over the next 3 to 4 days, I was sitting there, I was reading, and maybe was reading something unrelated, and then I came back and I'm reading it, and all of a sudden, again, the scales, a few pieces came into place for me that clicked in, and I saw it. I saw it in that moment, exactly as Aquinas lays it out. So I'll lay those out for you. I'm sitting there, and I remember having heard this statement that Saint Cardinal John Henry Newman had said, which was something along the lines of, if you don't like the Mass, you probably won't like heaven. And I'd always liked that, the ring of it, like, oh, okay, so there's this worship going on. But then of course there's this kind of worry that, like, I mean, I'm bored in Mass X number of times. Like, what if I won't like it? Whatever. All right. Anyways, that thought comes to mind for me. And it bridges up with something Aquinas teaches too in the first order of business dealing with God, which is the reason for all creation. Okay. And I start to piece together a number of these things, but it falls into place. Do this, and I'll try and take you guys through it. What Aquinas lays out as the principal reason for God creating all things is that it is to communicate his goodness. And now here I'm going to fill in a few details for you from reading the different texts. Namely, our angels.
Do it as fast as you can, AJ. We gotta.
Yeah. Namely, our angels created in glory? Answer is no. Okay. Was Mary created in glory? No, which she's not. Even where he slightly errs on the Immaculate Conception or whatever. Nope, not created. No human is created in glory. No created thing is created in glory. Only Christ. And this is how we actually know, because he talks about, was Christ a comprehensor from the first instant? Yes. Okay. Right. Nothing is created in glory. And if you know those necessary attributes of God, which God must be uncreated, you actually have the basis for the syllogism, which is God cannot create another God. Okay. Because due to its nature, it would have to be uncreated. Okay. So that's ruled out. So the question of universalism is actually a deeper question, which isn't, why isn't everyone saved? It's, why isn't everyone created immediately saved? The answer to that is that not a possibility. And so what God does in the absence of that is he creates a range of being, lower to higher, okay, that are best, through this whole interplay, are going to best approximate God's glory. Okay, so fast forward. We take that quote from St. John Henry Newman. We have that God, the purpose of creation is the communication of his goodness, higher to lower, because it's most going to approximate it. It's all going to be ordained back to God. Boom, it clicks for me, okay? Me going to heaven is not about me getting saved, nor is me being damned about me being damned. It is all about God. If I am in heaven, it's not for me that I'm in heaven. I am in heaven to behold the glory of God. I get to, my vision, but through sanctifying grace, I've been transformed such that I might behold the vision of God. And God's nature is such, this is what's useful to the metaphysical theological comment you made earlier about how it's different, right? God's nature is such, and he's the only one that through beholding him, you're actually infused with his glory, right? So that's the nature. No other thing works that way, that if you understand it, you receive the glory of that thing, only in God, right? And so it all, like I said, the scales fell. And I really feel that it was an example of that prayer being lined up and show where there was a clarity to it. The hell is not about the person damned. And the principal error where people run into trouble is the question of individualism, that for any individual that's damned, it is definitely better for them to be saved than for them to be damned. But they're not saved. Well, why? Right? Because it's not about them. And all of creation, it's not about them. And actually, if you want even the further answer, God's justice is one of the goods communicated in that range of being, lower to higher. And so it was one that through understanding it that way, it turned me toward God. And now, very briefly, in 2 minutes, I'm going to address why it's not Calvinism, because people will always come up with that. And by the way, in many ways, Calvin's very close. Calvin's error stems more from him disregarding the sacraments, which is a question having to do with grace. He collapses it all down. And what he can't handle well is that progression that St. Paul lays out: foreknown, predestined, called, justified, glorified. He can't handle the fact that that's the type cast. That's the type case. One who is saved will go through that. Okay. But it's not the individual case, because in the individual spectrum, there are many who are called who are not chosen. There are many who are justified who don't receive the grace of perseverance, as Aquinas says, and the other was the gospel, was our Lord. And so the way you rightly understand it is that, yes, if you are predestined, you will be saved. The key is, though, pertaining to us, it's more the question of calling, justification, perseverance, and glory. Okay. And he couldn't handle this well. And so he thought, well, if you're justified, then it means that you were both called, and then that means that you were predestined, and that means that you were foreknown, right? So if you're justified, you're guaranteed to be saved. Not the case. Not the case. And that's where his error stems from. And so you get the weird sort of moral implications and theological, philosophical implications of why God damns and things like this. The real reality is that, if God doesn't give you the grace to be saved, you will not be saved. Point blank, period. And you can do nothing to earn that grace. Okay. But as for why some are saved and others aren't, it's not about them. It's not about them. And so for me, when that clicked up, I was like, oh, wow, one of these chapters needs to be on predestination, and just lay it out as straightforward as I can. And we could do another conversation at another time in deeper length, because there's more to pry out about grace and the free will and how this interacts with these things, and hit it again. But I can tell you that I am firmly convinced that Aquinas is not in the wrong. It's also not some linguistic trick that we're just not quite getting what he's saying. It's there, and it's actually very profound.
Well, it really throws into contradistinction JP2's personalism, which almost sounds like so much love. We don't have time to go into it, but it does almost sound like so much love from the creature to from the creator to the creature, that the order of creation and the pyramidal hierarchy that is all about creation is all about the creator, like you say.
It's all about God.
It almost
communication
sounds
of his goodness.
like JP2's personalism can't coexist alongside Thomas's and Augustine's true account of this, which is something that I think Catholics should bear in the back of their mind. The more and more I study, the more and more I learn that John Paul II really subverted more and more Catholic doctrines than I originally thought. So
and I think I think these things will be straightened out. There were the disputes between the Molinists and the Dominicans, and the church kind of stepped into the breach and said, "Hey, hands off for now." That doesn't mean that the church will never declare on it. I do think these will be major areas.
Now, though. Folks out there, it's undeclared.
It's undeclared. Now. It's undeclared. Yeah. But I do think these will be areas that will be clarified in the coming ages, or however long that takes. Those will be clarified. Sexual ethics will be clarified more rigorously. And it doesn't mean that we won't have a sort of periodic phase of people trying to put forward the other. I think they'll serve as a juxtaposition, which a sign of contradiction, which will bring this out. And of course, I don't know how that will end. And I'm like anyone, I try and humble myself before Holy Mother Church. But again, when I have Augustine and Aquinas saying it, and then I have people what seems to be very pridefully saying, oh, well, actually, they together got this really well. I'm going, man, maybe, but maybe you're getting it wrong.
Very rarely in the history
of
ancient philosophy did Plato got lots wrong. Aristotle got very little wrong. When they're together on something, it's quite a claim to find yourself being gainsaid by them together. When Aquinas and Augustine are together on an issue, even more so. I would not
St. Paul. I'm sorry, but when you get it down, reading St. Paul, it's beautiful. It's elegant. Again, quick preview for anyone who's kind of go, well, okay, but what about St. Paul then? And script. Here's a quick tip for you. When he says grace, he is talking about sanctifying grace, the entitative habit of sanctifying grace. Okay, when he says by faith one is saved, he is talking about the sacrament of faith, which is baptism, which is the initiation of sanctifying grace. Okay, you cannot have merits. All of the Gospel of John makes sense if you understand grace in this way. If you understand it as, again, the insertion of the actual grace, the transient grace that works in all these different ways. If you understand it in that way, and I'm not saying there's nothing to it, but if you understand it in that way, you will be much more confounded going through this. Why did the forefathers of the faith of the Israelites, why did they have to wait until Christ died and resurrected in order to go to heaven? Couldn't that transient grace just have acted on them and then they're good and saved? It's sanctifying grace. It's why baptism is necessary for salvation. You have to receive sanctifying grace in order to be saved. Christ had to unlock that for human nature at the crucifixion, which is the atonement, which satisfies for sin, which is, I always say it this way. Christ's crucifixion condignly merits the glorification of human nature, not congruously merits. It's not like God is like, oh, well, that was a pretty nice action and now I'm going to give it to you. No, it actually condignly merits the glorification of nature. And that's why Christ, he says, I have a work to do. In the Gospel of John, I have come here to do a work. It's the crucifixion. He's not saying I'm here and just that I'm here first off is good, which it is. He's going, I have a work to do. And he says, where I'm going, you cannot follow me. And then 3 sentences later, he goes, my Father's mansion has many rooms and I go ahead of you to prepare a way for you. Okay, we have to receive sanctifying grace. And if you understand that, if you understand those, the unity between sanctifying grace, all right, and the sacraments, now when you read St. Paul again, it'll illumine, and you will see how St. Paul is obviously hyper Catholic, right? And it's more beautiful reading that way. It turns you toward God. You can't earn the merits of it. My conversion is not my work. Sure, God had some cooperating graces he gave me, which brought me along, right? That's the distinction Aquinas makes, operating grace and cooperating grace. Because grace either heals the soul, leads you to desire the good, carries out the good desired, perseveres in that, or reaches glory. Well, 1 and 2 are operant graces, healing the soul and desiring the good. Those are operant graces. To carry out the good and to persevere in the good proposed, those are going to be cooperating graces. And then to reach glory is going to be an operating grace that one gets. It's actually the perfection of grace. Not that the other graces are imperfect, as Aquinas says, but now it actually starts to come together and you start to see it. Yes, God is going to say, and he's going to bring you along in that process because it's going to bring other secondary goods with it. But it's God. It's God. And that actually reconciles Pelagianism, Neo-Pelagianism, those heresies, right? Now you're on good standing. That's where St. Paul says, let me not boast, let me boast in the Lord, right? Or whatever he says, let me not boast unless I boast in the Lord, right? Because anything else where your merit comes into play, your sort of unfounded merit, your sort of ungrace grounded merit is the thing that brings you to salvation. You can boast. You can boast me over that person. Look how I look at it. Look at how they understand the world. Look at this, right? And you can't boast in the Lord. It's his works. Period. The merit that we earn, where grace merits further grace, it's because the grace gave the condition for the furthering of it. And that's part of God's cooperating grace to bring you along. So I know that's a lot there and that's theologically heavy, but for our listeners who like that, which are a lot on this channel, I know that because I constantly meet people. And when they think deeply, they're like, oh yeah, rules for retrograde, love it. Right. So for our audience who does like to think in that way, I know that this won't be too much in the weeds for them. Maybe a little bit.
The book is
I don't think it'll be too
Advanced
much.
Christianity. Where can people get it, AJ? It's really good.
It's
really
on
good.
Amazon. Self-published it. I'd like to think that it was partly just an effort to say, I'm not doing this for validation, for the validation of a publisher, which would feel great. Don't get me wrong. It'd feel great. I'd love if a publisher called up and was like, hey, we want to publish it. That would be great. But I didn't have any queues waiting in my inbox for it. And so I said, okay, I think it's good. And it's a polish, it's a complete work. And so I'll publish it, get it out there, and maybe down the road have a publisher. But that's what it is. It's on Amazon. I put it together, and I hope, if nothing else, that it helps one grow in their faith.
Beautiful. Well, thanks for joining me today, folks. Yeah. Happy Thomas Aquinas feast day, March the 7th. I'm serious. This book, Advanced Christianity, is really, really helpful. Those who want a modern commentary to reason synthetically with Thomas. And it's what we ought to be doing in the church today. When things are not awry simply because of the Novus Ordo. I think that's contributory. Not awry just because we've got the worst pope in the history of the church, though that's certainly contributory. We've gotten away from the exposition of Aquinas, and he's got catechetical force. So read Thomas and read books about Thomas if you want to know your faith. And Advanced Christianity by my friend AJ Barker is simply one of them. God bless you all. Happy day.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
You got it, buddy. Peace.